Daf Yomi, Tractate Avodah Zarah, Tractate Avodah Zarah, page 54. A, top of the page, with the words Amar Chizkiah. Amar Chizkiah, Maikra, Bisamui, Kol Avnei, Mizbeach, Avnei Gad, Benutza Patzos, Benu Patzos, Lo Yikum, Asher Chamanam. Ika Vechamanim. ואיקה כאבני גיר מנוצפצות, לא יקומו נשרים והחמנים אליו יקומו. Chizkiah said, what is the verse from which this halacha is derived? Is it derived from the verse, by this shall the iniquity of Jacob be expiated? When he makes all the stones of the altar as limestones that are beaten into pieces, so that the Asherim and the sun images shall rise no more. Isaiah 27:9. This indicates that if the description as limestones that are beaten into pieces is fulfilled, then the statement the sun images shall rise no more also applies, and their status is revoked. If it is not fulfilled, then they shall rise, meaning that their status is not revoked. Tana nevat shelo asot v'shel chaver amuto uremini ezehu nebad kol she'oivdim oisu ben b'shoyu ben b'mezin ben b'oines ben b'ratzoin hayoines heichidami. The sages taught in the Braita that with regard to an item, for example, an animal that was worshipped by a certain person, if it is his item, it is prohibited, but if it is another's, it is permitted. The Gemara raises a contradiction from another Braita. What is considered an animal that was worshipped and is disqualified from being sacrificed in the temple? It is any animal that is worshipped, whether unwittingly or intentionally, whether under duress or willingly. What are the circumstances of this case of an animal worshipped under duress? Isn't it referring to a case where one forcibly took another's animal and bowed to it, indicating that one who worships the animal of another renders it forbidden? Amar Rabbi Barchama, lo, kegon she'anasuhu goyim ישתחווה לבהמתו דידי, מתקיף לרבי זירא, אוי נסחבון הבא דכסיב, ולנערה לא תעשה דבר. Rami Bar Chama says no. The Braita is referring to a case where the Gentiles coerced someone and he bowed to his own animal. Rabbi Zarah objects to this. And the Merciful One states, exempts the victim of circumstances beyond his control from punishment, as it is written with regard to a betrothed young woman who was raped, or beeped. I shouldn't say that. Hopefully they'll keep it. Who is beeped. But to mention, to the maiden you shall do nothing, as the maiden has no sin worthy of death. For as when a man rises against his neighbor and slays him, so is this matter. Deuteronomy 22. Verse 26. Ela amar hakol hayu bichlal lo yiseh avdehem וכשפרד לך הכתוב וחי בהם לא שיעמוד בהם יוצא עונש. Rather, Rava says all cases of idol worship were included in the prohibition. You shall not bow down to them, nor shall you serve them. Exodus 20, verse 5. Including the case of worship under duress. When the verse specified to you, you shall keep my statutes, each man shall do and live by them. Leviticus 18:5. And not that he should die by them. The verse excluded the case of duress. One would conclude from the verse that one who acts under duress is not considered an idol worshipper, and he is not required to sacrifice his life to refrain from worshipping idols. V'hadar katav rachmana v'lo techalelu et shem kadshi te'afilu be'oines ha'ketzad ha'betzina v'ha'befarhesia. The Merciful One then wrote, "And you shall not profane my holy name," Leviticus 22:32, indicating that the prohibition against idol worship applies even in a case of duress, as this constitutes a desecration of God's name. How can these texts be reconciled? This verse is referring to worshiping under duress in private, and that verse is referring to worshiping under duress in public. In private, one is not required to sacrifice his life in order to refrain from idol worship. In public, one is required to sacrifice his life rather than engage in idol worship. Therefore, if one engaged in idol worship in public, even under duress, the object of idol worship is forbidden. אמרו לרבנן לרבי תניא דמסייע לך בימוס יאוס של גויים בימוס יאוס של גויים בשעס השמד אף על פי שהשמד בטל אותן בימוס יאוס לא בטלו. The rabbi said to Rava, that which is taught in a Braita supports your opinion. It is taught in a Braita the following halacha applies with regard to platforms of Gentiles that were used for idol worship in a time of religious persecution, when Gentiles decree that Jews must engage in idol worship. During a time of religious persecution, one is required to sacrifice his life rather than transgress the prohibition against engaging in idolatrous worship, even in private. Therefore, even though the religious persecution was cancelled, the status of those platforms is not revoked, and they remain forbidden, despite the fact that the idol worship was performed under duress. Amar lahu, I mishum ha'olam tisayon ema Yisrael, mishum adabi upalachla beratzoin. Rav Ashi amar, lo etema emar el avada Yisrael, mishum adabi upalachla. Rava said to the rabbis, if one wishes to support my opinion due to that right, you cannot support my opinion, as one can say that perhaps there was an apostate Jew there and he worshipped the idol willingly, and therefore the platforms are forbidden. Rav Ashi says, do not say that one can say that that is a possibility. Rather, it is certain that there was an apostate Jew there, and you shouldn't say it's just possible, it's for sure that it happened. Okay, and he worshipped it willingly. Chizkiah says the contradiction between the Braitot with regard to an animal that was worshipped can be reconciled differently. The Braitot indicates that one who worships the animal of another renders it forbidden is referring to a case where in idolatrous worship one poured, כגון שניסח לעבודה זרה יין על קרניה מתקיף לה אהבה היי לבדו היי בימוס יהלמהו ושם. The Brighton indicates that one who worships the animal of another renders it forbidden, referring to a case when in idolatrous worship one poured a libation of wine on the horns of an animal belonging to another. Since the sacrificial rite was performed upon the animal itself, it is forbidden. Rivada bar Ahavar objects to this. Is this a case of an animal that was worshipped? This animal is a mere platform, meaning it serves merely as an altar, and it is permitted. Ela amar Rav Ada bar Ahava, kegon shenisech la yain ben karnea. David Baba said, Hiha, the Asula, Rabbi Yochanan. Afar Bisham, Ruhamistach Velebehet Chaviro, Lo Asara, Asabaman se Asara. Rather, Rav Ahda bar Ahava says that Braita is referring to a case where he poured a libation of wine in worship of the animal between its horns. In this case, one renders another's animal forbidden, as he performed a sacrificial rite upon the animal itself. And this is similar to that which Ula stated, as Ula came from Eretz Yisrael and said that Rabbi Yochanan says, even though the sages said that one who bows to the animal of another person does not render it prohibited. If he performed a sacrificial rite upon it, he rendered it prohibited. Amar lehu Rav Nachman, hu kuviyam leilula, kivar tarim Rav Huna lishmatich, bavim, diam Rav Huna haita behem et chavero, levutza mipnei avodah zarah, kevan sheshachat ba simon echad Zarah. Rav Nachman said to the rabbis, go out and say to Ula, this is not a novel concept, as Rav Huna already interpreted the halacha that you stated in Babylonia. This is, as Rav Huna says, in a case where the animal of another person was lying down before an object of idol worship. Once he cut one of the organs that must be severed in ritual slaughter, meaning either the windpipe or the gullet, he rendered it prohibited, as he performed a sacrificial rite upon the animal. The Gemara asks, from where do we derive that he rendered it prohibited? If we say that it is derived from the halacha, that priests who engage in idol worship or are disqualified from serving the temple, even if they did so under duress, perhaps the case of priests is different, as they possess awareness and are responsible for their actions. But rather, perhaps it is derived from the stones of the altar that were rendered forbidden by the Greeks, even though the stones were not theirs. The Gemara rejects this suggestion. But perhaps the reason the stones of the altar were prohibited is different, as explained by the statement of Rav Papa 52b, that when the Greeks entered the temple, it was defiled and become theirs. One, therefore, cannot derive from that case that one can render the property of another person forbidden. Now we turn to 54b. Top of the page. Ve'ela b'kelim dichtiv et kol ha'kelim asher izniach hamelech achaz b'malchuto b'malo echino v'hikdishanu hikdash ve'amar mar heichanu sheganazum v'hikdishanu v'hikdashnu shehikdashnu acherim tachtehen v'ha'en adam oser davar she'eno shelo. But rather it is derived from the case of vessels of a temple that Achaz used for idol worship, as it is written, and all the vessels which King Achaz in his reign did cast away when he acted treacherously, we have prepared and sanctified, and behold, they are before the altar of the Lord, 2 Chronicles 29:19. And the Master said, we have prepared, means that we entered them, and sanctified means that we sanctified under other vessels in their stead, as the original vessels were prohibited. But how could Achaz render the vessels of the temple forbidden, as a person does not render forbidden an item that is not his? Ella, kevan de'avad behu ma'aseh it sahur lehu, havanari kevan she'aseh ba'maseh asara. Rather, since Achaz performed a sacrificial rite upon them in idolatrous worship, the vessels were prohibited. Here too, when one performed a sacrificial rite upon the animal, rather, since Achaz performed a sacrificial rite upon them in idolatrous worship, the vessels were prohibited. Here too, when one performed a sacrificial rite upon the animal of another person by slaughtering it in idolatrous worship, he rendered it prohibited. Amar Rav Yochanan, af al pi she'amru hamishtachave lekarka olam lo yasara chafar b'boires shichin uma'avais asara ki asara shmuel bar Yehuda. Amar Rav Yochanan, af al pi she'amru hamishtachave levarechayim lo yasran asa'an chalifin v'lezara asara. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said that Rav Yochanan says, even though the sages said that one who bows to the ground does not render it prohibited, if one dug pits, ditches, and caves in it, he rendered it prohibited. When Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said that Rav Yochanan says, even though the sages said that one who bows to animals does not render them prohibited. If one rendered them an item of exchange for an object of idol worship, exchanging the animal for an object of idol worship, he rendered them prohibited. Yasa Ravin Amar Pligo Bar Rabbi Yishmael Bar Rabbi Yossi B'Rabbanan Chadam Al Chalifi Nasurin Chalifi Mutarin Chadam Afilu Chalifi Nami Nasurin. When Ravin came from Eretz Israel to Babylonia, he said, Rabbi Yishmael Bar Rabbi Yossi and the rabbis disagree with regard to the halakha concerning the item exchange for an object of worship. One says that the item of the exchange is prohibited, but if one then acquired another item in exchange for the item of that exchange, the exchange of the exchange is permitted. And one says that even the exchange of the exchange is also prohibited. My time in the Vande Amar Khalif Khalif and Nasurin Amar Kra Yaidi Kherem Kabayu Ko Chadal Chaimenu Arehu Kamahu Idach Amar Kra Hu Velo Khalife Khalifin. The Gemara asks, what is the reason of the one who says the exchange is permitted? The verse states, and you shall not bring an abomination into your house that it should become accursed like it. You shall utterly detest it, for it is accursed. Deuteronomy 7:26. Not only do you become accursed, but anything you cause to become yours from the exchange of an object of idol worship is accursed like it, meaning it is forbidden like the object of idol worship itself. And as for the other Tana, from where does he derive that the exchange of the exchange is permitted? The verse states, for it is accursed. Infer from this that it, the object of idol worship, is forbidden, but not the exchange of the exchange. The Gemara asks, and as for the other Tana, how does he interpret the term it? The Gemara answers, he requires that term to exclude an item acquired in exchange for orla, or for diverse kinds of crops that grew in the vineyard. The verse indicates that if one sold orla of diverse kinds that grew in a vineyard and betrothed a woman with the money from the sale, she is betrothed. The Gemara asks, and from where does the other Talmud derive this halacha? He holds that orla and diverse kinds that grew in a vineyard do not require an exclusion. This is because idol worship in the sabbatical year are two verses that come as one, meaning both teach the same principle that an item acquired in exchange for a forbidden item is forbidden, and any two verses that come as one do not teach their common halacha to other cases. Avodah Zarah, Hagan Shvius Dixiv, Ki Yoveli Kodesh Tiachem, Ma Kodesh Tofes, Es Dama Veasur, Av Shvius Tofeses, Es Dama Veasur. The Gemara explains the source of this halacha with regard to idol worship is that ruling, which we said earlier, with regard to the sabbatical year. The source is as it is written, for it is a jubilee year. It shall be sacred for you. Leviticus 25:12. The verse juxtaposes the jubilee year, the produce of which has the same status as produce of the sabbatical year, and sacred items. Infer from this that just as when one buys consecrated property, it transfers its sanctity to the money with which it is redeemed, and the money is prohibited, so too the produce of the sabbatical year transfers its sanctity to the money with which it is redeemed, and the money is prohibited. The Gemara asks, if so, one could say that just as consecrated property transfers its sanctity to the money with which it is redeemed, and is transferred to non-sacred status, so too the produce of the sabbatical year transfers the sanctity to the money with which it is redeemed and is transferred to non-sacred status. Therefore, the verse states it shall be sacred for you, indicating that the produce shall always be as it is, and it is not desacralized. Haketzad Okay, Sada, yeah. Okay, Sad, die, okay, the cock pit is basar. Eilu misabri mishvi is a cock basar dagim. Yotz a basar nichnas dagim, nichnas dagim. Yain, yotzu dagim, nichnas yain, Yain, shemen, yotzu yain, nichnas shemen. Okay, it's a rachel nachel nitbas. Mishvi is supriyas moas. The Gemara explains how so. If one purchased meat with produce in the sabbatical year, both these and those, meaning the meat and the produce, are eradicated in the sabbatical year, the sanctity of the sabbatical year takes effect with regard to the meat as well. It's treated like the produce, and it must be disposed of when the obligation to eradicate the produce of the sabbatical year goes into effect. If he then purchases fish with this meat, the meat loses its consecrated status, and the fish assume the consecrated state. If he then purchases wine with these fish, the fish lose their consecrated status, and the wine assumes the consecrated state. If he then purchases oil with the wine loses its consecrated status, and the oil assumes the consecrated state. How so? The final item purchased has the sanctity of the sabbatical year transferred to it, and the sabbatical year produce itself remains forbidden. V'ika v'idach v'savar shnei ksuvin abayim ke'echad melamdin yisrichu le'ma'otinhu. The Gemara asks, and as for the other Tana who maintains the term it excludes an item exchanged for orla or different kinds that grew in the vineyard, how does he respond to this? The Gemara answers, he holds the two verses that come as one, meaning that teach the same principle, teach their common halacha in two other cases. And one could have derived the prohibition from the cases of idol worship and the sabbatical year. Therefore, the term it was necessary in order to exclude from the prohibition of an item exchanged for orla or for different kinds that grew in the vineyard. That's that. New Mishnah. Mishnah. Okay, we'll take a little break. We'll continue with the Mishnah. We'll take it out after that. Okay, continuing with the Mishnah. שאלו את הזקן ברוימי אם אין רצון עבודה זרה למה אין עבד מבט לה אמר להן אילו דבר שאין צריך לעולם בו היו עובדים היו מבט לו הרי אין עובדים לחמה וללבנה ולכוכבים ולמזלות יעבד עולם מבני השויטים. The Gentiles asked the Jewish sages who were in Rome, if it is not God's will that people should engage in idol worship, why does he not eliminate it? The sages said to them, were people worshipping only objects? Were people worshipping only objects for which the world has no need? He would eliminate it. But they worship the sun and the moon and the stars and the constellations. Should he destroy his world because of the fools? I don't think that's such a great answer. I mean, he can just destroy the fools. Okay, you see? Then maybe they'll say something like that. Amar lehen im kain yabed davar she'ein tzarich la'olam boi yaniach davar she'tzarich la'olam boi. Amar lehen af anu machazikin yidei avodehen shel eilu shoimrim teidu she'ein elohos she'reihen lo batelu. The Gentiles said to the sages, if so, let him destroy those objects of idol worship for which the world has no need, and leave those objects for which the world has a need. The sages said to him, if that were to happen, we would thereby be supporting the worshippers of those objects for which the world has need. As they would say, you should know that these are truly gods, as they were not eliminated from the world, whereas the others were eliminated. Okay, Talmud. Tanu Rabbanan Jalu Philosophin Et Hazikein Beroimi Im Elohechem Ein Retzono Avodah Zarah Mipnei Ma Eino Mevatla Amar Lehen Afilu Ledavar She'ein Ha'olam Tzorech Lo Hayu Ovdin Harei Hu Mevatla Harei Hein Ovdin Lachma וללבנה ולכוכבים ולמזלות. יאבד עולם מפני השוטים, אלא עולם כמנהגו נוהג. עולם כמנהגו נוהג, ושוטים שקלקלו עתידין ליתן את הדין. Okay. Our sages taught, certain philosophers asked the sages who were in Rome, if it is not your God's will that people should engage in idol worship, for what reason does he not eliminate it? The sages said to them, were people worshipping only objects for which the world has no need, he would eliminate it. But didn't we just say this? Yeah, I think it's repeating it. Okay. But they worship the sun, the moon, the stars. He should destroy the world because of the fools. Rather, the world follows its course, and the fools who sinned will be held to judgment in the future for their transgressions. Davar harei shegazal sa'al shel chitim v'halach, in brackets, v'halach uzra b'karka dinhu shelo tatzmiach ela olam k'minhago noheg. The right represents another matter that illustrates the same concept. Consider the case of the one who stole a saw of wheat and went and planted it in the ground. By right, it should not grow. But the world goes along and follows its course, and the fools who sinned will be held to judgment in the future for their transgressions. Right, it's kind of like same thing, like a woman who was violated. Sometimes, she shouldn't get pregnant at all. No, Olam k'minhago noheg. Sometimes it's meant to be. Davar acher harei sheba reishes chavei. Very similar. Davar acher sheba reishes chavei din hu shelo titabel ela olam k'minhago noheg. And because of that, you have mamzers. Okay, they basically, I kind of preempted what the Talmud was going to say, but I said in the case of violation of a woman. But they say in the case of adultery, even if it's consensual, but still they say in the case of adultery, it should be a scientific fact that they don't get pregnant. But no, they could get pregnant, it could be mamzer. The Braita presents another matter that illustrates the same concept. Consider the case of one who engaged in intercourse with the wife of another. By right, she should not become pregnant. But the world goes along and follows its course, and the fools who sin will be held to judgment in the future for their transgressions. V'hainu damar Reish Lakish, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Lo dayam shoyim shoysin zela, sheli pumbe. The Gemara comments, and this is as Reish Lakish says, the Holy One must be, he said, is it not enough for the wicked that they treat my dye for a selah coin, as if it were ownerless, using it without my permission and against my will, as they impregnate women adulterously? But moreover, they also trouble me and cause me to sign the result of their actions against my will, as I form the fetus and give it life, even when its creation is the result of prohibited sexual intercourse. And it's a mamzer. That's how mamzers are born. They're born from this thing, and yet God still lets it grow. Who knows what the soul of a mamzer was, though? Who knows what the real cheshbon is? Sha'al filosifus echad. Es Rabban Gamliel Katuv b'Toratchem ki Hashem Elokecha Eish Ochlahu Elkana. We just had this in our week's parsha last week. B'Bnei Maj mitkaneh be'avodah en mitkaneh ba. A certain philosopher asked Rabban Gamliel, it is written in your Torah with regard to the prohibition against idol worship, for Lord your God is a devouring fire, a jealous God. Deuteronomy 4:24. For what reason is he jealous, and does he exact vengeance from the idol worshippers? But he is not jealous of the idol itself, and does not destroy it. Amar lo emshal lecha משל למה הדבר דומה? למלך בשר ודם שהיה לו בן אחד, באותו הבן היה מגדל לו את הכלב, ויעלה לו שם על שם אביו, ושהוא נשבע אומר, וחיי כלב הבא, כששמע המלך על מי הוא כועס, על הבן הוא כועס, או על הכלב הוא כועס. הרי אומר על הבן הוא כועס. Rabbi Gamliel said to the philosopher, I will relate a parable to you. To what is this matter comparable? It may be compared to a king of flesh and blood who had one son, and that son was raising a dog. And the son gave the dog a name, naming him after his father. When the son would take an oath, he would say, I swear by the life of the dog, my father. When the king heard about this, with whom was the king angry? Is he angry with the son, or is he angry with the dog? You must say he is angry with the son. So too God is angry with the worshippers who attribute divinity to objects of idol worship, and not with the objects of idol worship themselves. Amar lo, kelev ata koreh ota? V'alo yesh ba mamash? Amar lo, umar ha'ita? Amar lo, פעם אחת נפלה דלקה בעירנו, ונשרפה כל העיר כולה, ואותו בית עבודה זר לא נשרף. The philosopher said to Rabbi Gamliel, do you call the idol dog? But the idol truly exists. It has power. Rabbi Gamliel says to the philosopher, and what did you see that caused you to believe that idols have power? The philosopher said to Rabbi Gamliel, a fire once broke out in our city, and the entire city was burned down, but that temple of idol worship was not burned down. Amar lo, Rabbi Gamliel said to him, Em sholecha, mashal lama adavar dome. למלך בשר ודם ששרך לה מדינה. כשהוא עושה מלחמה עם החיים הוא עושה, או עם המתים הוא עושה. אבל הוא אומר עם החיים הוא עושה. Rabban Gamliel says to the philosopher, I will relate a parable to you. To what is this matter comparable? It may be compared to a king of flesh and blood whose province sinned against him. When he wages war, does he wage war against the living, or does he wage war against the dead? You must say that he wages war against the living. God punishes the living worshippers, and not the idol, which is not alive. Amar lo, kelev ata koreh ota, met ata koreh ota, im ken yavdena min ha'olam. Amar lo, ilu לדבר שאין העולם צריך לו היו עובדים, הרי הוא בלבד הרי הם עובדים לחמה וללבנה, לכוכבים ולמזלות, אפיקים ולגאויס. יעבד עולמו בני שועטים, וכן הוא אומר. The philosopher said to Rabbi Gamliel, you call the idol a dog, you call the idol dead. If it is so, let God remove it from the world. It's a fair question, no? Rabbi Gamliel said to the philosopher, were people worshipping only objects for which the world has no need, he would eliminate it. But they worship the sun and the moon, the stars, the constellations, and the streams and the valleys. Should he destroy his world because of fools? And so the verse states,